Hello and welcome back to Super Hell, aka the Mystery Spotcast, a show where two recovering Supernatural fans subject themselves to a rewatch so no one else ever has to watch Supernatural again. I'm Klaudia, my pronouns are she, her, and you can find me on social media at Klaudia Says, K-A-L-U-D-I-A Says.
And I'm Ollie, I use any pronouns, and you can find me on social media at Ollie Fresh, it's fresh with a PH. We have we have an episode today that is maybe I would say it's a classic. It's a classic Supernatural episode. It is definitely the one that has a GIF that is probably circulated the most because of one specific Tumblr post, which I will talk about when we get there.
Although I would say both of these episodes have like GIFs that are pretty, like, as soon as, like, there were scenes in these where I went, oh, I remember. This is a classic.
It's crazy because I don't remember the second episode like super well.
As soon as I figured out what the monster was, I was like, oh, I remember this exactly.
It's so funny. I feel like season 4 for me is, I'm like, the ones I remember with stunning clarity, and the ones I don't remember, I'm like, this might as well have not happened. It's gone in one ear out the other.
I mean, and if Cass isn't there, it's questionable. It's questionable.
These are two solid episodes. Once again, I hate season 4's delivering bangers. Both have their issues.
Yeah.
Don't get it twisted. Both have some pretty serious issues.
But they're like well constructed pieces of television. Also, I want to say the second episode, I just want to warn people in advance, the way that we are going to discuss the back half of that episode, we may be unintelligible.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. And listen, I'm going to say something as a joke, but I'm going to say something as a joke that many are not going to like.
I hope everyone takes it out of context.
It's also kind of not a joke. Like, it's kind of true, but like
in a bad way.
I don't know.
Oh, there is one piece of Supernatural news. On this podcast, a lot of times we shit on Jared Padalecki because that man is annoying. But I'll say this.
Yeah, but he said something kind of based.
Pretty slayful and correct about the state of the entertainment industry because the CW, have they canceled Walker? I'm not sure.
Yeah, Walker got canceled.
Okay, I wasn't sure what the context was, but his fuck-ass show that he made after Supernatural that the CW kept on as one of like the only legacy shows left when they sold the CW, just got canceled, and he basically ripped them a new one. Honestly, I'll just read it because he said, I feel like the CW that I was a part of last year is not the CW that I was a part of under former chairman and CEO Mark Pedowitz for that entire almost 20-year stretch. They're just changing the network around where it's not really going to be a TV network as much as it's going to be, here's something fun for an hour that you'll never watch again, but hopefully you watch it, and it's cheap. And I hate to say it, but I'm just being honest. I mean, fuck it. They can't fire me again. And I'm just being brutally honest. I think it felt to me like they were looking for really easy, cheap content that they could fill up time with. Like, I think he just said in like 3 sentences what I've been trying to say about the entire frankly like TV and film industry, and every time I've talking about it, and I'm like, and I have to thank Jared Padalecki for that. Like, that's crazy. Like,
no,
it's insane.
It's crazy, too, because you know what I will say I appreciate about Jared Padalecki? He's not afraid to call people out. Et tu, Brute? It's a real et tu, Brute moment.
Wait, have we explained...
a certified et tu, Brute moment. I think if you... there are people who've explained it better than me. If you Google Jared Padalecki et tu, Brute, you will be able to see all the receipts, all of the tea. It's genuinely was one of my favorite moments of being, like, even a little bit tangentially knowledgeable about Supernatural. And I've got to say, Jared Padalecki is slowly rising to be like, I know I've said my piece about him many times, but I'm kind of like, as Misha Collins makes more and more of an ass of himself, he's somehow become like his ranking in like actors who are in the main cast of Supernatural, like he's gone up a rank, you know?
Yeah. Also, I'm reading the article that this is from. It's like a wide-ranging interview with Variety where he just says shit like Wait, no, because the quote before this is crazy. He's like, well, they told us this because they were going in a different direction. I mean, they have an hour of Trivial Pursuit and an hour of Scrabble coming up. I don't know why you wouldn't just download the app or grab a board game and play with your friends, but they're clearly just, what's that great quote? It's like, if somebody tells you who they are, ask questions. If somebody shows you who they are, believe them. Jared, I have to stand a little bit.
God damn.
Damn.
He kind of ate them up, and I gotta say, I'm standing a little bit.
Okay, he also said, but I haven't taken a whole lot of time just yet to think about what's next. I kind of said this at the end of Supernatural. I wasn't interested in acting again, per se, but I do love producing. And he's like, he literally just found out about this a couple weeks ago, and so he's just like, this is him off the fucking cuff. Like... So, and now,
oh my God,
people are asking...
Wait, wouldn't it be so funny if he created a Supernatural spinoff as well? But this one, I think maybe this one will be the charm. Maybe this one will do it.
Well, they did ask him if he's going to be in The Boys, which is Eric Kripke's current work, and he said, Kripke and I texted today. It's not been written yet, but I think he is saying the final season doesn't even film until 2025, and I'm going to play in Kripke's newest playground. So, and he said, I love Jensen and Eric Kripke. So, I fear that he is going to show up on The Boys, and Misha Collins will be the only unemployed one.
Everyone clapped.
Oh,
I
God.
really think that, guys, the further out we get, the more I'm like, I really could see HBO, who now, like, owns that IP, sort of, technically.
Supernatural, yeah.
HBO picking up. Does HBO own it? Or does Warner...
Well, I
Warner
believe
Brothers,
it's
so that's on
technically
HBO.
Warner Brothers, I guess.
But Warner Brothers is, like, affiliated with... Because I think HBO is, like,
It is a Warner Brothers brand, yes.
Yeah. So that... Okay. So, yeah. So, I think HBO Max original... We talked about the Winchesters becoming this, but I think HBO Max original Supernatural Season 16... And obviously, because it's a streaming model, it would have like 10 episodes a season. Oh. Can you imagine them trying to do a season of this show in 10 episodes?
It would be horrific. Because
they did it in season 3 with what, like 11 or 12?
It was 13, I want to say.
Or was it 13? And it was like...
It was something.
Oh my God, what are we doing? And I'm like, okay, with that, they didn't know they were going to have only 13 because like it was a writer's strike.
Yeah.
But the idea of them going into it knowing they only had 10 episodes, like what? I feel like part of what makes Supernatural so good is the yearning. You know, I don't know.
I just think it's, I want people to understand, we really don't like Jared Padalecki as well on this podcast. So me saying actually I have to stand is a lot.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna lie, the further away we get from Supernatural, the more I'm like, maybe it just does that to you. Like, if you're a cast member on Supernatural, it just does crazy things to you, and maybe he's evened out since then.
Yeah, I'm like,
I'm ready to work it out on the remix with Jared Padalecki.
We should call the episode Working It Out on the Remix with Jared Padalecki.
Girl, so confusing, the version with Jared Padalecki.
The way that I feel about Jared Padalecki is kind of like Lord and Charlie XCX, but the way I feel about Misha Collins is Drake and Kendrick.
Okay. Stop. Okay, also, literally just before we started recording, I was like, my bangs look like shit, and Klaudia said, that's just like Sam Winchester. People say we're alike. They say we've got the same hair. I think this means Jared and we need to release a song together. Jared, I know you're listening. Please send me a DM. That's where I list out my phone number on the podcast. See, like, Jared, if you're not Jared Padalecki, don't text me, but if you are him, please do. Guys, it's the state of the world. The state of the world we live in is really crazy. It's really beautiful when you think about it.
Anyways, let's talk about Supernatural.
The episode that we are going to be talking about, the first one, is called After School Special. It's season 4, episode 13. Many of you have likely heard of this episode, and many of you are probably very excited to hear our coverage of it. Maybe not because of probably not because you actually remember the content of the episode, other than some maybe vague ideas. but probably because you remember the scene. One of the Dean Winchester scenes of all time. Is it a good scene? I don't know. But it's sure as hell memorable. And Tumblr would not let you forget about it. But we'll get there. The episode starts. We see a group of teenagers at a high school sitting around at like a cafeteria, like in a cafeteria at a table. And they're like, I heard Taylor like slept with him. She gave him the full cowgirl. And they're like, oh my God, like that's so gross. And it's like some popular girls and some jockey kind of guys. And they're talking about how this one girl slept with some guy at their high school and they are like having, you know, discourse, and they're calling her like, oh, she's such a slut, like, ha ha ha, which is one of those things because I'm like, I wasn't particularly popular in high school. I watched Supernatural, so, you know.
I'm sorry.
But
I shouldn't laugh.
No, it's fair. But, I also am like, these people writing have clearly, like, never interacted with a teenage girl before, and I was like, man, that's, like, crazy. Who wrote this episode? Andrew Dabb and Daniel Laughlin. And we'll see, you know, they famously, Andrew Dabb, the showrunner for the last couple seasons of the show, responsible for the Rusty Nail.
Also responsible
maybe did what
for
he could, who's to say?
Yoati Cass, you know?
Yoati Cass, see. Let's do the rest of the episode in Spanish.
Oh God.
How good's your Spanish, Klaudia? Do you think we could do it?
I'd rather not. A lot of it is also like purposeful parody of like teen movies in the 80s and 90s.
That's
like,
true.
So it's giving very Mean Girls. It's giving, and Mean Girls is not the 90s. Mean Girls is the 2000s. But
yeah, and it's also giving the idea of like the after school special.
Yeah, like I think some of it is a little exaggerated, which Supernatural does do, especially in their cold opens when they're trying to like have a little bit of a little schlocky horror kind of vibe, which I like, except for they really leaned into slut shaming this girl, and it was like, all right, we get it.
Yeah. So they're making fun of this girl, and the girl walks up, and I was like, oh my God, that's Octavia from The 100, the other hit CW show. So she's Taylor, right? And she is like wearing like a little red tank top. She comes to sit down with her friends, and they're like, oh, sorry, like sluts can't sit with us. And she's like, wait, what? And they are all start like chanting, slut, 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 like in her face. So she like storms off, and she sits next to, like goes to another table and sits down with a girl who is fat. And
she's not 2000s fat. She's like actually fat. I would say she's not like very large, but like she's 2000s fat is like mid-size. She's like a pretty like regular size fat girl, like,
yeah. And we say this is two fat bitches. We are not body shaming by using the word fat. We need to normalize the use of the word fat, because I'm like, yeah, I am a little fat, and I love that about me.
Yeah.
And I think this poor girl needed someone to tell her that.
Yeah. Well, it was the 2000s. Correct me if I'm wrong, it's 2009. You know she was going fucking through it. They're like, she's the size of a normal American woman, and they're like, oh my God, you're such a fat cow. And you're like, Jesus.
Yeah. So, and it's so funny too, because I haven't even explained this scene yet, but I feel like you never see fat people on this show, especially at this era of this show, because again, it's the late 2000s, early aughts.
Except for Bobby. He's short compared to the boys, but like, so you don't really notice it, but he's bigger.
He's rotund. Anyway.
Maybe that's because fatness is more acceptable in older white men. Let's examine.
Interesting. But so Taylor sits down at the table with this girl, and the girl's like, oh, like, that's so messed up of them to say that to you. I'm sorry. And the girl's like, I don't want you to be sorry, you like fat ugly cow, or something just equally vile. So then it cuts, and it's the next day, and Taylor is in the girl's bathroom. She's clearly been crying, and the girl from the table walks in, and Taylor turns around and she's like, hey, I'm so sorry about yesterday. I was just really stressed, and like, it was not nice. But this girl is like, you called me fat and ugly. who's ugly now, and like smashes her face into the mirror and starts like beating the shit out of her, and then like holds her in the toilet and gives her like a swirly and like drowns her to death.
You're like, whoa. Like half of me was like, okay, girl, go. Well, the important part, you see a single tear come out of her eye, but it's not water, it's black goo.
That's true. I totally forgot. Yeah, you see like a black goo coming out of her eye. So something's funky. Then we cut, and it's this girl. Let me see, what was her name? I believe it's April. Yeah, so April is like, do I have to tell the story again? And she's wearing like scrubs, so it's safe to assume she's in some kind of facility. And we hear Sam, and he's like, tell me what happened. And she's like, I've already tried to explain and no one believes me. And he's like, well, why don't you tell me? I promise that I'm a little different. So she tells him, like, I was there, like, I was not in control of my actions. And he's like, yeah, you told the police you were possessed. And she's like, yeah, because I felt my body doing these things. And I didn't like Taylor. She was bullying me all the time relentlessly, but I didn't want to hurt her, and I certainly didn't want to kill her. But while it was happening, it was like I was in my body, but I couldn't control it, and it was just doing it by itself. Do you believe me? And Sam's like, yeah, I do. We cut, and Sam and Dean are in the car, and they're kind of talking about like, oh, do we think this is a case? Because Dean's like, yeah, kids can be vicious sometimes. And Sam's like, I don't know, but like, I believe her. Something's off. Why don't we just go to the school and check it out? And Dean's like, oh my God, like, why do you want to go back there? It sucks there. And he's like, it was our old high school. And Dean's like, yeah, but it sucked. And we were only there for like 2 weeks. So, but okay, fine, if you think it's important. So they go to this school. It's called Truman High School. And Dean's like, oh, home of the bombers. We really want to go back there.
I'd like to point out it's a high school called Truman High, with their mascot is the Bombers. Much to unpack.
That's fucking crazy.
Much to unpack about this country.
Oh my God. But so they head off, and we find out that we get a flashback, and it's 1997, and we see Sam and Dean, but they're getting out of the Impala, but we realize that they're kids, and this is again a flashback. And this is one of our first times. I think this is the first time we get Brock Kelly as Dean, like as young Dean.
Yeah, because before we had them both as kids, when we saw Sapphire Barbie and stuff like that, this is teen Dean, and like preteen Sam. It's very much giving, because I went to a secondary school that was like both middle and high school, where you'd had like 7th graders who looked like a child and then like 17-year-olds, and it's literally looks like that with the two of them.
That's the crazy thing, because the thing too about this is that the kid who plays young Sam in this is the same kid who's played young Sam like in season 3. So they just recast older Dean because I think they wanted him to look like older.
The thing is that Sam hasn't like had his like growth spurt or whatever yet.
Yeah,
like that.
Sam is canonically a late bloomer, which is hilarious. Because Sam is a freshman in high school when this is happening. And Dean is like, I think he's... Yes!
Oh, wow.
Yeah, no, he's just tiny. That's why they keep making fun of him for being small.
I was like, damn, he looks like he's in the 7th grade.
It just drives me crazy how good the casting on this show is. Because Brock Kelly, I'm like, if it was a dark room, it would be hard to tell tell the difference between him and Jensen Ackles at times.
Both of them, their acting is so spot on as the two of them. I'm like, damn.
It's like the actual like vocal patterns are like the same, and it's crazy. But the thing too is that Colin Ford, who plays young Sam, is also just so good. Like, they could not have found 2 better actors to play these parts at this age. It's crazy. But we see a flashback to the boys, and they're coming into the school, and Sam is complaining about not wanting to be at a new school, and he's like, oh, Dean, I don't want to do this. When's Dad coming back? And Dean's like, well, Dad's going to be on a trip for like 2 weeks. whatever, just settle in, it'll be fine. And Sam's like, yeah. And then we go to an all new school again. So it's clear that Dean is in the mindset of like, I'm gonna try to enjoy this life, like we're rocking and rolling. And Sam is a lot more like, I want a normal life, and we keep having to uproot and do this over and over again. We see them like go into their respective classes and get introduced, and the teacher, like, they're both in 2 different classes, and Sam's teacher is a man, and I think he's like an English teacher, but he's like, oh, this is our new student, Sam Winchester, do you want to introduce yourself? And like, is there anything you want to say to the class? And Sam's like, not really. And then Dean, it's like, oh, Dean, do you want to say anything to the class? And he's like, not really, sweetheart, to his female teacher.
And you're like, the thing is that normally this behavior on Dean is like, girl, what are you doing? And this time it's like, yeah, him as a teenager was probably like that.
Yeah. So he goes to sit, Dean goes to his seat and walks by a woman, like not a woman, a student, a teenage girl, a blonde girl. And I was like, oh my God, that's Caroline from the Vampire Diaries. They're getting everybody. So that was crazy, but she's kind of like looking over at him, and throughout the class, he's giving these like snide answers. Like there's a teacher who's like, Mr. Winchester, where are your books? And he's like, honey, I'm not going to be here long enough to need books. So he's clearly like a bad boy. And then we cut to Sam in his class, and he's walking to his desk, and he puts his backpack down, and like a switchblade falls out, and he grabs it and like puts it back in his backpack. And this kid who has these big, like, Coke bottle almost glasses, but with the big black rims, actually. And he's clearly, like, a nerd. And he's like, oh my God, like, is that yours? And Sam's like, oh, yeah. But he is clearly embarrassed. He doesn't want to be weird. And then a kid behind the nerdy boy starts flicking the kid's ear. And Sam goes, hey, stop it. And the bully is like, oh, what are you going to do? Do you want to take it instead? And he's like, yeah, maybe I do. And the bully kind of backs up and is like, okay. And the kid sitting next to Sam is like, oh my gosh, like, thanks, I'm Barry. So Sam made a new friend.
I love how their dynamics are always the same, which is Dean is hyper compensating for something, and Sam is making a new little friend who will come to a sad end. And that's every episode of Supernatural.
Yeah. So the teacher, Sam's teacher, like as this is happening, is talking about how the kids need to write a paper, an essay about their most memorable family experience. So keep that in mind for later, because it is crushing. We cut back to present day, and I don't know if I mentioned it, but at the end of the last sequence where Dean was like, oh, fine, I guess we'll go back to the school. He was like, well, how are we going to get in? What are we going to pose as? And Sam was like, oh, I have an idea. So we cut to Sam, who's posing as a janitor. And then we cut to, again, a Dean Winchester scene that many will know. The camera pans up. He is wearing a white polo shirt, red shorts, sneakers, a headband, like a sweatband. He is the substitute gym teacher. He has a whistle in his mouth and he blows it. He lines up these high schoolers and is like, today, you are going to be engaging in the art of dodgeball. You have one objective. It's to dodge. And one of the kids is like, but our teacher, she normally doesn't let us play dodgeball because it's too dangerous. And he's like, well, she's getting married in Florida right now. So today you will play dodgeball. And the kid's like, and he's like, give me a lap.
Dean is enjoying this to a level. Now remember, this is a man who canonically is obsessed with classic Americana movies and who did not get the proper high school experience. So he is LARPing in a way that is beyond, like, and this is not the first nor last time that Dean has gotten to LARP something. But you ask yourself, why does he have to do this to get in to the school, for them to figure this stuff out? I don't know. But like he
Also, this seems like terrible cover. Like, you are now posing as a, how did you get to be a substitute gym teacher? Did you just show up and there happened to be an opening that they hadn't contacted anyone about? Or do you think they showed up and were like, he's like, I'm the substitute for today, and they were like, oh, for this class? And then he realized it was gym class? I don't know. The logistics on this are crazy.
Where did he get the outfit? Like, much to unpack. How do you do a background check on the Winchesters who are supposed to be dead?
No, that's what I'm saying. Because, okay, here's another thing I was gonna say. This is like in Indiana, and I think it's implied to be not like a super small town, but is like a pretty like average town in Indiana. If there's one thing that I have learned from being married to someone from a small town, if someone from your small town does something, people from there never shut the fuck up about it. Because, I'm sorry, Sam and Dean Winchester were like wanted criminals who had been on a huge spree, wanted by the FBI, and then found dead in a dramatic way. You think that the people of this town wouldn't be like, oh my god, those guys died, they went to our high school for 2 weeks, and they were crazy weird. Like, everyone who would know who they were in this town.
No, I mean, maybe people wouldn't have made the connection because, like, they didn't, like, look the same, but I feel like somebody would have been like, isn't that the same guy? Like, I don't know.
That's what I'm saying. I just had to say it. I had to get it out of the way. It's not that big a deal. It didn't, like, break my immersion or anything. I just had to say it. Anyway,
I would also like to say the caption on the photo of Dean being a gym teacher on the wiki is, Dean embraces his authority in gym class. Embraces his authority? Much to unpack.
Well, so Dean, we see these kids like playing dodgeball and like beating the shit out of each other in the background as Sam walks into the gym and Dean walks over to him. And he pulls out the whistle and he's like, this whistle makes me their god. And Sam goes, right, nice shorts.
Which I do also love because normally it is Dean making the that's so gay kind of joke. But Sam does a couple in these 2 episodes. And I'm like, yeah, that's...
And if you've been on Tumblr, there was this post that was like, let's make this like the most reblogged GIF on Tumblr, and it was it was the pan up of him wearing these red shorts. You have seen it. You know exactly what I'm talking about if you were on Tumblr. Honestly, anytime between the years of like 2010 to basically
2014.
Honestly, probably like 2015 or 2016.
Yeah.
If I'm honest.
There's probably a solid 15-year period. Oh my god. Wow. Holy shit.
Yeah.
Wait,
is it crazy that this show is going to be 20 years old next year?
That's... Wow. That's... No, but also I just thought about how we're reaching a point of critical mass of how long I've been on Tumblr, that I've been on Tumblr for at least 14 years. Wow.
Almost over half of your life.
Oh, that's really dark. Oh, I don't like this anymore. I say on my Supernatural podcast.
No, because you know what's messed up though, Klaudia? Because you and I made Tumblrs about the same time, and I'm a little bit younger than you, so it's definitely been at least like over half of my life I've been on Tumblr. That's dark.
Worse. No, yeah, because most people definitely made it younger than I did. God, that's dark. Anyway.
But to be fair, again, I'm also a little younger than you are, Grandma. So, guys, damn. Claudia's Italian. I think I should be calling her Nonna. So that's what I'm only gonna call her from now on.
The 9th?
Oh my god! Wait.
Wait. Oh, people on their Supernatural podcast get distracted by talking about the locked tomb. Fork found in kitchen.
But the point is, Sam is talking to Dean. He's like, I don't know. Like, I wasn't able to find any sulfur on the grounds. I couldn't find, like, any other examples of demonic possession. Because the other thing, too, is that he had asked April, like, did you smell rotten eggs or sulfur? Did you see any smoke? And she was like, what? No. So he's like, okay, we're not finding any signs of, like, demonic possession. So I don't know, like, I don't know if there's actually a case here. Like, maybe we should just, maybe we should just go. And Dean's like, what, you want to go now? I was able to go through the office, and I found 3 of the cheerleaders are legal. Do you want to guess which 3?
This is not the first time that Dean has said something like that. And to that I say, Dean, baby girl, I know that's not you. To the writers, I say jail, prison, jail, prison. Angela Davis, close your ears. Jail, prison.
Yeah, I'm like, hey guys, teenage girls cannot catch any, teenage girls are constantly catching strays, especially in shows written in the early mid-2000s. Get away from them. Honestly, shows written now, shows that have always been written, always have it out for teenage girls. Teenage girls, get behind me. So anyway, but then we cut, and we see this kid who's clearly kind of a nerdy kid. And I think they're in a cooking class. Yeah, they're in a cooking class. And there's a jock who's his partner at this station.
It's the same jock who was helping to slut shame the girl in the first scene.
It is, correct. But I think, they're in a home ec class. And he's like, I'm going to have to copy your homework. And he's like, what? No, you can't copy my homework again. And he's like, no, I have to copy your homework again, or I'm going to have to punch you in the face with this fist here. And he goes, oh. We see a look sort of come over his face, and he goes, that fist? And he points at his hand, and he's like, yeah, that one. He looks down at the food processor, which is empty but on. I don't know why the food processor was on, but it results in him grabbing his hand and putting it in the food processor, holding it there as blood splashes around.
I think it was plugged in and he just turned it on.
I don't know, it was on.
Oh. I thought you see him turn it on. Oh.
Maybe you do and I'm just stupid. But the point is that he puts the bully's hand in a food processor, and everyone starts screaming and running out of the room, and the teacher grabs the kid and pulls this jock out, and the boy, the nerd, collapses, and Sam walks in and he sees this black substance sort of come out of his ear, and he runs up, he grabs the kid, he's like, oh my god, are you all right? And the kid's like, yeah, I don't remember anything. What happened? So we have another case. Something's going on. And Sam recognizes that what was leaking out of this boy's ear is ectoplasm. So he and Dean are walking down the hallway, they've grouped up, and he's like, okay, this has to be a ghost possession. And Dean's like, wow, a ghost possession, that's super rare. And Sam's like, yeah, but it's not unheard of. Were you able to find out if there were any violent deaths while you were going through the office? And Dean's like, yeah, there was only one. I think he's like, yeah, there was one violent death that happened. It was a suicide that happened in the first floor girls' bathroom. A kid by the name of Barry Cook. And it was in 1998, which is the year after the boys were there. And Sam gets this look on his face because if you'll recall, Barry Cook was the name of the little nerdy boy that Sam had developed sort of a kinship with. But Dean's like, oh, did you know him? And Sam's like, yeah, I did. School was hard for him. It was tough for him. And clearly, looks upset. And Dean's like, okay, well, it seems like bullies are the ones who are getting attacked. So it's possessing people who are nerds or people who are losers, and it's going after bullies. And then we have a flashback. Another flashback. And Sam and Barry are little kids again. Not little kids. They're 14. But they're walking down the hallway kind of chatting. Barry's telling him yeah, no, I'm gonna go to college. It has I found a school that has the best program for veterinary medicine. And Sam's like, oh, you like animals? And he's like, yeah, no, they're nicer than people.
This is also, they're walking down the hallway and Barry gets knocked over by some bullies, and Sam is helping him up, whatever. And so he is just actively bullied.
Yeah, no. So Sam had like run up and thank you for reminding me. Sam had run up and was helping him pick up his stuff. So now that's why they were talking. That's why they were having that conversation. But as they're having this conversation, the bully from before, Dirk is his name. He is the one who was picking on Barry in class, who Sam was like, "Oh, I'll fight you," or he didn't say that, but he was like, "Yeah, I'll take it instead, whatever." So Dirk stops them, and he's like, "Oh, so what are you going to do? Like, you want to fight me? You want to fight me?" And then he says a derogatory word towards Sam that I'm not going to say here. But
it's a derogatory word toward, it's a derogatory word towards people of a smaller stature that people in the 2000s really loved to use, so it did not surprise me that it was really in the show. And
a lot. This is not the first time, but
yeah, he used it a lot.
But that's his name for Sam. So he calls Sam that, and Sam's like, "I'm not gonna fight you," and he's like, "Oh, why? Because you're scared?" And Sam just kind of stands there. He's like, "Whatever," and this kid punches the shit out of Sam, like knocks him back. He's on the ground, and he goes like he's gonna throw another punch, and Sam is like, looks at him, and you can tell that he's like making the decision to not fight back. And then the teacher from before, Mr. Wyatt, who's Sam's teacher, he runs up and is like, "Hey, stop it, get away." So it cuts, we're after school, and Sam is sitting there, and Dean is like, "I'm gonna, like," he's like, "I'm gonna find that jerk and like rip his lungs out. Like, I'm gonna beat the shit out of this kid who attacked you, Sam. Why didn't you fight back?" And Sam's like, "You don't have to do all that. Like, it's not a big deal." And he's like, "Well, Dad's not here, so it's my job to like take care of you, and I'm going to take care of this." And he's like, "Dean, I don't want to be the freak here. We're always the freaks because we know things and we're good at things, but we jump around all the time. I just want to be normal for once." And it's a very sad scene of Sam just being like, "Oh."
It's so sad. Like, it's very sad. Also, now why was my first thought, is somebody gonna match my freak? Anyway, no, it's very sad. And it's also very sad seeing Dean at this point in his life being like, "Dad is everything, and I'm just gonna be this, whatever." It's like, God, it is so many thoughts. And then he dies on a rusty nail. Anyway,
another thing that we get in this flashback that I forgot about is while Sam is like getting beat up, Dean is in this. So this scene actually happens first, and I just forgot to mention it. But Dean is in a supply closet at the school, making out with this girl, with Amanda, I think is her name.
Amanda, yeah.
Caroline from the Vampire Diaries. But he and Caroline from the Vampire Diaries are making out, and she's like. He's like, "I think maybe we could go hang out later, you, me, and a large popcorn with extra butter." And she's like, "Ooh, freaky." That's not what she says, but that's the vibe.
It's like, what?
Yeah. She's like, "Well, I can't. My curfew's at 11. And he's like, "Oh, right." And they start kissing again, and she's like, "When's your curfew?" And he's like, "Oh, I don't have one." And she stops and looks at him, and she's like, "Wait, like, really?" And he's like, "Yeah, no, I can do whatever I want. Yeah." Like, he's like, "Oh, it's all cool." And she's like, "Well, your parents really don't like care when you get home?" And he's like, "Oh, well, my dad's away now. So it's just me and my brother. I can do whatever I want. We're set up at the motel down the street." And she's like, "A motel? That's awful. Like, that sounds terrible. Don't you miss your dad?" And like, stop laughing, Klaudia. It's not funny. No, it's actually really sad.
It's funny because he's like, it's funny because she's like, oh my, she's like, "Oh my God." She's basically like, "Oh my God, you're a victim." Like she's like, and
no, literally, she's like, "Oh, it's so like," she's kind of being like, I think is probably one of the first people to directly say to Dean, like, "Well, don't you miss your dad? Like, isn't this messed up that it's just you and your brother and your dad's gone and you don't know when he's coming back?" And it's like, you see in real time Dean realizing, like, or maybe not, probably not realizing, but like having to confront outside of his own thoughts the idea that like, my dad is shitty and is really treating my brother and I quite poorly, and I am a victim.
Well, and this episode also has, for both Sam and Dean, moments of someone external showing them basic compassion and kindness when they were a kid that they had really never experienced before. And like this is it for like that for him, like, and also like it really does play into the thing with Dean constantly of like he is always overcompensating, whether it's overcompensating how cool he is, overcompensating his masculinity, whatever it is, and he's like, yeah, isn't it so cool, isn't it, whatever, and people are like, actually no, you are being neglected. Yeah. Like, girl. And in this moment he's like being faced with it, and it happens more than once in this episode because like, Jesus Christ. He's like, anyways.
Oh yeah, also another thing that happens in this scene is like Dean being like, well, Sam, like, Dad called and he's not going to be here for like another week, so, you know, like, so they keep pushing back how long they're going to be there. So they're both kind of trying to find like what is normal in this place that we're about to get ripped out of, but we keep being here long enough that we have to settle. We then cut. It is back in present day. It is the middle of the night. Sam and Dean are digging up Barry's grave and burning his bones. And Sam is clearly feeling some type of way about it. He's like, you know, if only we had stayed like another year at that school, maybe I could have done something. I could have helped Barry. You know, he had such a hard time, and like I could have helped him. And Dean is like, Sam, what happened is tragic. It was awful, but it's not your fault. And I'm happy we left that school. It sucked. And Sam's like, well, it wasn't all bad. And Dean's like, he says, quote, how can you say that after what happened to you? And then we get another flashback. So we see that Sam is in his English class and the other kids are getting up and leaving. And the teacher who stopped the fight, Mr. Wyatt, he's like, oh, Sam, can you talk to me? Like, come talk to me when you're done. So Sam stops and goes to talk to the teacher, and he's like, I'm sorry, if this is about the fight, like, I swear I didn't start it. And Mr. Wyatt's like, oh, no, it's not about the fight. It's actually about this essay that you wrote. You know, this was supposed to be like real, like a story about your family. And he's like, yeah, I know. And he's like, well, so I assume this story about you guys hunting a werewolf isn't true. And Sam kind of makes a face, but is like, yeah, I made it up. And Mr. White's like, well, is this the way that you would describe your family, though? Because it sounds like your dad's driven.
The way he says it,
he says it like he's like, fuck this guy.
He's like, your dad sounds driven, and your brother sounds like a real character, and you're like, well, damn. Shit.
Yeah. And Sam's like, listen, I'm sorry, if you're gonna flunk me, that's okay. I'm probably not gonna be at this school for much longer. And Mr. Wyatt's like, well, no, I'm giving you an A. If this is a really good horror story, this is really well written. Have you thought about going into writing? And Sam's like, well, no, I have to go into the family business, so I can't. And he's like, well, what do you mean? Like, what's the family business? And Sam's like, my dad's a mechanic. And I have to be a mechanic too. And he says, well, do you want to go into the family business? And Sam is like, that's the first time anyone's ever asked me that. More than anything, no. Which breaks my heart. But Mr. Wyatt's like, well, listen, Sam, I don't want to overstep my bounds, but there are only a couple decisions in life that will, you know, lead you to where you're going to be. It's important that you make them yourself.
This is like a high-key great piece of advice and great line just from this random teacher in this.
Yeah.
And I was like, damn. Also, given all we know that happens to Sam, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna cry now. Shit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm deeply upset. like deeply. Also, if you're from the perspective of the teacher, he's like he's got to think that his dad is like a drug dealer or something. He's like, I know that you can't tell me because I'm a mandated reporter, but like, he's like, because he's like, oh, I'm a mechanic, but my dad travels all the time. And he's like, do I need to call CPS for this child? Like, literally, it's like one of those kind of moments.
We cut back. Sam has told Dean, he's like, I want to go back to school to talk to my teacher, to talk to Mr. Wyatt. And Dean is like, oh my God, like, that's so stupid. Why would you want to do that? And he's like, I just want to. So it cuts to Sam, and he's walking down the halls of the school, which is crazy because he's just like, I guess maybe because they think he's a janitor. I don't know. Because he's not in a uniform or anything. He's just in his regular clothes. But he goes and he's walking down the hall, and he goes up to Mr. Wyatt's classroom, and a girl stops and is like, do you know how to get to room, like a student is like, do you know how to get to room 31 or 301? And Sam is like, oh yeah, you just like head down the hall and go this way. And she's like, thanks, Sam, you got tall. And he's like, what? And then she starts like attacking him and like
she stabs him,
beating the shit out of him, kinda
like she stabs him with something.
Yeah, but he's fine.
But he's fine after?
Fine. This is like a pen.
I don't know.
But she stabs him with like something, and he like grabs some salt and like throws it in her mouth and like holds it in, and we see like a ghostly apparition that's just like a big person made of smoke like fly out of her body and fly up into the ceiling and disappear. And Sam's like holding this kid. He's like, oh my God, are you all right? We cut. I think they're in their motel room at this point. Or they're somewhere. I think that's where they are. Or they're, yeah. Maybe they're outside. I don't remember. Not important. But they're talking about how, like, crazy it is. Because they're like, okay, well, it's obviously not Barry. And Sam is kind of like, yeah, like, it's messed up. Like, I was Barry's friend, and then I burned his bones, and, like, it wasn't even him. So Sam is feeling some kind of way still. But Sam has like these student records that I guess he got from the office, and he's like, hang on, these kids, which he goes through the most insane list of references to refer to these children. And also important to know, the girl who talked to Sam is Asian. The one who stabbed him was Asian. So Dean says, you know what we noticed about these students? Martha Dump Truck, Revenge of the Nerds, and Hello Kitty.
Genuinely?
Dean Winchester, fuck you, Andrew Dabb, and Daniel Laughlin, whichever of you wrote that,
ew.
Fuck you.
Ew.
But Dean's like, they all ride the same bus. And Sam's like, well, it's kind of like stupid that a bus would be haunted. Also, if they're on a bus, like, the spirit would be on the bus, like, it couldn't leave the bus. And Sam was like, wait a minute, not true. Spirits are bound to the places that they've been shackled, like by either physical remains or something, but there have been rare stories of people getting possessed, and then the spirit will stay with them and they can go miles and miles, but like, if they get like exorcised or if like they get pushed from the body, then they bounce back. And that's kind of what happened when I stopped that girl. So they go to check out the bus, and they're like, okay, we're getting a lot of EMF readings, so clearly that's why there was no EMF at the school, because the bus is haunted. Dean, like, opens the glove compartment, and he's like, okay, someone just got an updated driver's license, like, 2 months ago. It's for, Dirk McGregor Sr. He got this, like, right before the first attack. And Sam is like, oh my God, I knew him, because Dirk was the bully who was messing with Sam. We then cut to a scene in the past where Sam is like, it's after school, Sam is leaving, and Dean is like, man, we gotta get out of this town, because Dad called and said he's gonna be another week, and Amanda wants me to meet her family, and I don't do families. Um, so whatever. So Dean kind of like walks off. I don't know what he's doing. Not important.
They also say something in that conversation where Sam, like, Dean's like, oh, I gotta get out of here. And Sam's like, girl, like, at least you have that. He's like, oh, well, at least you have like Amanda. And he's like, yeah, but I gotta meet her family, whatever. And like, Sam's like, I'm actively suffering here and you are making out with a cute girl. Like, get a grip.
Literally. But Sam notices that Barry is getting like messed with again. And Sam like runs up and is like, leave him alone. And it's Dirk. And Dirk is like, oh, like, what are you gonna do about it? You're just gonna not fight back again? And he goes to punch Sam. And then Sam punches him back and like beats the shit out of him. And this actor who's playing Sam is much smaller than this kid, but he whoops his ass. And it was like also a very well directed like fight scene for like what the kind of fight this was. Like, I felt like those punches were connecting. They had a vitriol to them. But at the end, he knocks this kid over and he's like, you're not strong. You're not tough. You're just a jerk. Huh. Dirk the jerk. And all the kids surrounding this kid start chanting Dirk the jerk.
It's so good.
It's so funny. And then it was serious. It's not funny, is it? So then we cut. Again, it's not funny. The boys have gone to visit Dirk McGregor Sr., so Dirk's dad, who's also Dirk. They sit down and he's like, well, you know, it's crazy you guys are friends of Dirk's, because they'd said that they were friends. And he's like, yeah, Dirk, I don't really recall him having many friends. You know, he was really troubled. School was hard for him. And they were like, yeah, like, I'm sorry to hear he passed. We had no idea, like, what happened. And he's like, well, it was, you know, at first it was the alcohol, and then it was the drugs, and then by 18, it was too late. I watched him slip through my fingers, and I couldn't do anything about it. You know, it was really hard. He got bullied a lot in school. And Sam was like, oh, he got bullied? He's like, well, yeah, you know, we didn't have a lot of money, and I was working 3 jobs, and his mother had cancer, and he had to spend all his time taking care of her, and he watched her wither away, and right before his freshman year, she died, and that changed him. It made him angry, and people weren't nice to him, and school was really hard for him. And, you know, like, kids, they would taunt him. They'd call him Dirk the jerk. And Sam looks so guilty, and I'm sorry, because it's like this, it is like a very emotional, well done scene, but I was like laughing. I'm sorry, that is funny as shit.
Sam's ass got got.
No, like, imagine you gave someone a mean nickname in high school because he was beating the shit out of your friends, and then this situation happens. Like, this is messed up, Sam. You never know someone's story.
Yeah, Sam.
Sam's like, I didn't know about his mother. I'm so sorry to hear about that. I'm sorry for your loss. Yeah. And Dean's like, oh, well, we'd love to pay our respects. Where's he buried? And he goes, oh, no, I had Dirk cremated. And Dean says, all of him? Which is like an objectively crazy thing to say.
This is a prime example of when Dean has no social tact and Sam has to just use the big brown eyes to fix it. Because I'm like, why are you saying these words?
No,
what?
He says all of them. And then, and the guy doesn't even react to that as being weird. Like, he's like, yeah, of course. Oh, no, well, I still have a lock of his hair. And they're like, oh, Dean's like, oh, like, where is it? And he's like, well, I keep it in my Bible that's on my bus. So we cut. It is the evening, and there's a sports team on the bus. The bus is being actively driven by what I believe to be the coach. And they're like, oh, like, thanks for driving. It's not really important, but know that it's like an older guy driving. And the important thing to know is that the jocks, they're all bullies. So the driver starts kind of like winding the bus and doing risky shit.
They put down road strips, so the bus has to stop and pull over, and then Sam and Dean come and pretend to be like DEA agents.
Yeah. So they
Which I think is funny.
they are like, it's so funny. For a second I thought you said DEI agents, and I was like, oh, the woke mob is coming for bus drivers everywhere.
The woke mob, Sam and Dean Winchester.
Yeah. So
can't be a demon anymore because I'm woke.
So they get on the bus with guns blazing and put it up to the bus driver's head and are like, come on, get out of the car. So Sam takes him and is like standing outside, and Dean looks at like the sports team and is like, well, your bus driver, we found he's dealing some pretty heavy stuff, so just everybody stay where you are. So Dean starts looking through like the glove compartment, and he finds the Bible and shakes it and realizes that there's no hair in there. And which is also crazy, because if you shake it and the hair pieces fall out, you'd be fucked. But not important.
He's an idiot.
He's an idiot.
Stupid.
But Sam is outside, and he's like, Dirk, I know it's you. You know, I'm really sorry about everything. And it really does, basically goes on a whole, like, it does get better after high school, and I'm sorry that you never got to see that. I'm sorry that I'm sorry that I made it hard for you. And he's like, oh, well, that's a shame. And then he goes to sort of attack, and Dean has like a saltwater dipped rope, which is a crazy fucking thing to have, but they wrap it around him to like hold him there. I think they may have done that at the beginning.
Yeah, no, but the key thing though that Dirk says in this gym, in this like coach's body, is that he's like, no, he's like, no, it actually doesn't get better, not for me. And you're like, damn, shit. And then he starts attacking.
They put this, so at the beginning, they put this like saltwater soaked rope around him, which I'm like, crazy thing to have. So, but Dean's like, you're not going anywhere. And I think that's like right before Dean starts like searching the glove compartment. But regardless, Sam gives this little speech, and he says that, and he's like, well, you know what? For me, it doesn't get better. And he manages to break through this rope and starts like fighting Sam. Well, he doesn't even really fight Sam. He goes to fight Sam, and Sam shoots him like 3 times. And I know that it's like he shoots him with rock salt, which is supposed to like stop ghosts, but like if you shoot anyone with anything solid out of a gun at basically point blank range, like that will kill someone.
No, literally.
And I think it's like this guy does survive and he's fine, and I guess, but I'm like, Sam fully just shot this guy who's being possessed. Cool. Regardless, he gets hit with the rock salt. He flies out of the body and goes in and possesses one of the students. And then the student who's possessed comes out and starts attacking Sam. And Sam is like, keep looking for the hair. And Dean starts like searching the driver, because the driver was like, you'll never find it. Or whatever, Dirk, whoever he's possessing is like, you'll never find it. And Dean ends up finding it, and he goes, sorry about this, it's not what it looks like, as he's like undressing the bus driver trying to find the lock. And he finds it.
It's a lot.
He finds it in his shoe, and he grabs it and he burns it. And he's like, oh, sorry about this. And then we see the ghost get destroyed. And then we cut. We are back at the high school as Sam is an adult, and he's walking down the hall, like assumedly to go talk to his teacher. And we get these cuts of Sam doing this, and then Sam being young walking down the hall. And we see young Sam, and everyone's like, oh man, that was awesome. Like, great job for beating up Dirk the jerk. And like, Sam's kind of getting his moment of being like, yeah, I'm the cool guy. Like, I'm kind of like finally fitting in at this school. And then we see Dean in the broom closet again, and he's making out with a different girl. And someone knocks, and he goes, oh, just a couple more minutes. And then Amanda walks in. And she's like, Dean's like, hey, baby, like, I'm sorry. It was just too serious, too fast, blah, 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 whatever. And she's like, I'm not.
He tries to lie. He tries to. Oh, yeah. She caught him kissing this girl, like, and he tries to lie. He's like, "Oh, we were just studying." I'm like, "Girl, you're an idiot."
Yeah, but she's like, Dean, I'm not like sad or anything. I'm not even disappointed. I'm just sorry. I feel sorry for you that you think like you have to pretend to be tough. And I thought maybe I could get through to you because of like how sweet you are with your brother and how much you care about things, but you're just compensating. Basically, that's the point of what she says. And Dean looks like...
She drags his ass in front of, like, in the hallway.
Yeah.
She full face, like, got him.
And then...
got him. Like, damn.
But then and she walks away, and Dean's like, well, you don't need to be sorry for me. I'm like, you don't have to be. I don't want you to be sorry for me. I save lives. I'm a hero. What are you looking at? I'm a hero. And it's so sad. It's so sad.
It's awful. You're like, oh, Dean. Oh no. And oh, God. Like.
And the boys walk out of school together, and the Impala pulls up, and Dean's like, oh, thank God Dad's finally here. Let's get out of here. And you can see that Sam looks kind of sad as he was once again getting ripped away from having a normal school experience.
Also, his friend Barry is looking out at him through the window. In that last scene when he's leaving, his friend Barry is watching the Impala drive away, and you're like, oh, ow.
That's messed up. So then present-day Sam goes into Mr. Wyatt's classroom, and Mr. Wyatt's there, same guy, and he's like, oh, I'm sure you don't remember me. I was a student of yours. And he's like, oh, yeah. And he's like, yeah, I'm Sam, yeah. And I just wanted to say, like, thank you. You know, you were the first person who ever asked me what I wanted to do, and I think you're, like, the only reason that I went to college. And he's like, oh, that's awesome. Did you ever end up pursuing writing or pursuing what you wanted to do? And he's like, well, yeah. And, you know, then I kind of ended up back in the family business. You know, you grow up and, you know, your life changes, dreams change. And he's like, well, he gives this sort of long speech being like, oh, like, it's so, you know, it's great that you were able to make decisions for yourself, whatever. And he's like, but, you know, and even if you're there now, the only thing that really matters is that you're happy. Are you happy, Sam? And Sam pauses. He looks down. He looks back up at him. And the episode ends. Also, sorry, listeners, someone just started setting off fireworks outside of my house. So, if you can hear that, sorry.
No, but, like, that is an insane way to end the episode. It's like, Sam, are you happy? It's like, damn. My God. Like, what the fuck? I mean, objectively, no, he is having to, like, fight the fact that Lucifer is returning, and, like, his brother did die for a hot minute and then come back from hell. So, like, no, but, like, shit. Sometimes they hit you with an episode that is at the same time so silly and frightening. You're like, what the fuck? Maybe the real Supernatural was the fucked up shit we told ourselves about life along the way. Oh, and I will say, one thing I like about this episode is also, like, it really deals with one of the main themes of Supernatural, is like, do we really have free will? What does free will mean? What will we do for free will? And I was like, all right, they ate that one up. They ate it up.
Yeah.
It's
also, what I really like too is that this kind of, like, it shows really interesting aspects of both Sam and Dean.
Yeah.
Because it shows, like, from the start that Sam has always wanted more, always wanted to have something of a normal life, and that Dean is so obsessed with compensating for the fact that he wants a normal life that he gets almost hyper enthusiastic about being on the road and being a free thinker and doing all this stuff. Like, he feels like he has to want to do that, so he focuses so hard on trying to embody that, and then falls back on self-destructive behaviors when he has to cope with it and cope with the idea that he's lost the ability to have a normal life. And it's a very interesting, like, it's a very, like, well-written look into their characters.
Yeah.
If only We had that towards the end of the show.
Looking at the trivia for this episode is kind of crazy because I do believe that
on the wiki, on the Supernatural wiki, shout out.
Jensen Ackles' persona as the gym coach is a reference to his character in Smallville, and this is also the same high school where they filmed Smallville, which I didn't know. Also, when you talked about it being the actress from the 100, apparently this was her acting debut in this episode.
That's crazy. It's called The 100, by the way. Get it right.
Also, okay.
Sorry. The 100 was a show that I watched like 2 seasons religiously of and was very important to me being like, oh my god, wait, women can kiss? Anyway.
Speaking of women can kiss, okay, in the Supernatural wiki, you said Florida. It was actually Massachusetts.
I realized this. I messed up because I thought when Dean was like, oh, your teacher right now is in I was like, oh, is in Florida, because I didn't remember, because I didn't write it down because I wasn't thinking about it. But according to the Supernatural wiki, he does say that she's off getting married in Massachusetts, which is funny because you know where gay marriage was legal at this time in 2009? Massachusetts. Lesbian gym teacher? Discuss.
I mean, lesbian gym teacher, fork found in kitchen. Yeah, I was like, oh, I guess in 2009 that would have been an obvious joke, but now it's like, why is she getting married in Massachusetts?
It's because we've come so far. Great.
Much to unpack, one could say. Anyways, I do love the actors who play them when they were young. I think they slay boots, and they are in it again.
They're so good.
The next episode. When this episode started, I was like, oh, I can't.
I did not remember this episode. I didn't remember it. I still don't. I don't recall it at all. But it is so crazy. The way that this episode goes, I was about halfway through, my jaw dropped, and I don't think I closed my mouth until the end of the show. I don't think I breathed.
The whole episode, I was like, there was a part, and I was like, which one is this? And I was like, oh, is this the succubus episode? And then I was like, wait, oh my god, is it? And then I was like, oh my god, it's the succubus episode. It's not a succubus, it's a siren. But it's like,
don't spoil it, Klaudia, you fucker. You always do this.
This is a show about spoiling Supernatural. Just know this episode contains pieces of Dean Winchester's lore that are key in anyone's PowerPoint. It's in every Dean Winchester is bisexual PowerPoint, is all I'm gonna say. And this is also one of those early Supernatural episodes where you're like, I don't know how else you could have read this. It's just on the page. And apparently we were correct, according to Ben Edlund. We thought we were crazy, but he was right. So looking at this in retrospect is wild and crazy. This episode is called, it's written by a woman. This episode is called Sex and Violence, so get ready.
It should be called Sex and Violence Against Women. So content warning for domestic violence quite heavily throughout this episode.
Yeah, we'll be entering our, two people talking about true crime murders of women era, unfortunately. We open on this guy, his name is Adam. He's coming home late from work. His wife is making dinner, and she's like, oh, why were you late? And they're having a little banter, whatever. And he seems kind of stressed and kind of tired. And she's like, oh, I hope you're doing okay, whatever. And then she's like, oh, and our friends invited us to this thing this weekend, whatever. And he's getting more and more agitated. And she's like, oh, we accepted this thing. He's like, well, why'd you do that? What, why'd you do that? I'm tired. Why would I want to spend my weekend with him?
Yeah. She's like, oh, it's Gary's having his 40th birthday. And she's like, yeah, I told his wife we would go. And then he's like, why would we do? And drops it the drop of a pin.
And you're like, oh, shit. Also, right before he walked in, she's using a meat tenderizer on some meat to make dinner. And he starts to lose his shit, and then he picks up a meat tenderizer and kills her, and you just see like a blood splatter or whatever, and then it's Supernatural, and you're like, what the fuck? And you're like, oh, this is abusive fucking man, right? We cut to a motel room where Dean is asleep. He wakes up and he sees Sam in the bathroom talking to someone on the phone, talking about demonic signs. The implication is that he is talking to Ruby on the phone. He's talking to his girl. And Dean's visibly pissed. And when Sam returns, Dean pretends to be asleep, and then he like pretends to wake up, and Sam's like, and he's like, oh, what were you doing in there? And Sam's like, going to the bathroom? Like, you want me to draw you a picture? And he's like, oh, were you on the phone with somebody? And it's like, yeah, I was talking to Bobby about these murders, whatever. And then they get into, he's like, oh, and I also found a case. I found a case in Bedford, Iowa, where these 3 men all killed their wives. And this is where it's hilarious to me, because in this instance, in order to investigate, they decide to pose as attorneys, which is like, I don't think you're gonna, okay. So they go visit this guy, Adam, in jail, and they're talking to him, and they're posing as attorneys wanting to represent him. And this is where we enter a propaganda state where he's like, I don't need an attorney. I know that I did it, whatever. And I'm like, you always ask for an attorney, no matter what. But he's like, I'm just going to take the deal. I know that I did it. And they're like, okay, girl, well, we just want to know what happened.
Side note, even if you are guilty and you are going to plead guilty, you still should get an attorney. But I guess the implication is this guy is like feels so bad about what he did. That's kind of the narrative point, but I just want to point it out to everyone listening.
Please. Well, and I think the implication is also that they're posing as public defenders. He's like, they keep sending you guys in, whatever. So he is like, Dean is like, well, it's probably a good thing. And Sam's like, shut up. Like, girl, stop. And they're talking to this guy, and they're like, you had a really good like relationship. Like, what happened? Whatever. And he's like, I loved my wife, but I killed her, whatever. And they're like, huh? And they're like, but why'd you do it? And he's like, I don't know, whatever. And then they pull out a credit card statement. And he's like, how'd you get that? And they're like, doesn't matter. Explain to us. And he's like, we know what charges for things like M&T Entertainment are. And he's like, okay, like, how'd you get me? Whatever. And he's like, so you were going to the strip club, whatever. And Adam, the guy who killed his wife, starts like crying. And he's like, I'm not normally a guy who goes to strip clubs. I just went with my buddy for his bachelorette party. And then I met this girl named Jasmine, and I didn't know anything about her, but she was just so wonderful. And he's like, it wasn't even about like her looks or the sex or anything. Like, she felt like she was perfect for me, and she was everything that I wanted. And that's like the key thing. And he's like, and she said that she wanted to be with me, and she said she was going to meet me somewhere, and then she ditched me, and she said that my wife had to be out of the way, and then I killed her, and I don't know why. And you're like, that's suspicious. That's weird. But he does say that she worked at a club called the Honey Wagon. So we cut to Sam visiting this doctor who, I guess she's making a joke about how she's like both like the medical examiner and also like she does a couple jobs because it's a small town. And her name is Dr. Kara Roberts, and she conducted the autopsy, and she took the blood samples, whatever. And her and Sam have a bit of a flirty dynamic. No,
she is down for business. She is so like, no, I'm obsessed with her because she was like, yeah, well, like, she's also clearly like a hungover.
Yeah.
Sam was like, whoa, rough night. She's like, well, when you do every job in town, it is a little rough. But there's a funny gag later when they're leaving, and Sam is like, I find the best thing for a hangover is a hot, greasy breakfast. And she goes, I'm the only doctor here.
Like, okay.
And it's like this fun little rapport.
She's like, all right. Like, she slays. And she's like, I conducted the autopsy. I didn't. She's like, I had to conduct the autopsy and also the tox report on the perps because I got to do everything around here. She's very much giving like the doctor in Stardew Valley. She's exhausted. And she's like, I took the blood samples, and she's like, okay, the only thing that, and she's like, I didn't find anything. He's like, and you didn't find, and he's like, you didn't find anything abnormal. And she's like, can I see your badge number again? Because he is posing as the FBI, and he's like, okay, girl. And like, he shows her his badge again, and then she's like, okay, I did see one thing that was kind of weird, but like, it's really unexplainable. The only thing that was the same was that there were high levels of the hormone oxytocin in their blood, and like, this is a hormone that's like, people like, it's emitted when people are lactating and breastfeeding and stuff, but also when people are having sex. And he's like, how would somebody have that much in their system that it was so abnormal in all three of them? And she's like, I have no idea. And she's like, she's saying shit that's probably like medically untrue. Be like, it's the love hormone, whatever. And then Dean walks in the door, and this is key. She has been flirting with Sam the whole time. Dean walks in the door. She does not even give him a second fucking glance. She's like, hi. And Dean tries to, like, flirt with her, and he's like, what the fuck? And
she said, oh, gay.
No, literally. She was like, all right, homo.
Anyway.
Like, damn. He's like, anyway, it's actually, like, so funny. And, like, they walk out, and Dean's like, damn, like, you were cock blocking me in there. But he can't say cock blocking on the CW, so he's like, says, like, C blocking or something. And Sam's like, okay, girl, like, she was clearly flirting with me, but like, okay. And then they get out to the car, and Dean looks just fucking ecstatic, and Sam's like, are you good? And he's like, Sam, we have a case, and we have an excuse to go to the strip club, an actual case involving strippers. Like, he's been waiting for this one.
I wrote down, he says, strippers, Sammy, strippers, finally.
And here's the thing.
And then he spends the most time in the case with the strippers he spends hanging out with a man. Who said that? No,
that was the moment where I went, oh, I know what episode this is.
Sorry, spoilers for the episode.
Like, it's so crazy. It's nuts. So there's a photo of them on the wiki, and the caption is, Dean is a little perturbed by the Sam Carrot chemistry. Oh, so you hate straight people, Dean? So Dean and Sam visit the honey wagon, where each of the men had fallen for a different stripper, but they found out. Also key to note here, I do believe all the different strippers' names are Disney princess names, because there's an Ariel, there's a Belle, there's a Jasmine. I'm like, come on, girl.
There's also Aurora.
Oh, wow. That's a lot. When they're at the strip club, whatever, and when they go in, I think it's either Sam or Dean is questioning, like, the owner, right? I want to say, and like, is questioning the owner, and they're like, you know,
yeah.
Don't you think it's a little weird that, like, you know, this happened with 3 people? And he's like, yeah, I think it's weird, but it's none of my fucking business. And then they're like, you know, can we see some of your records, whatever? And he's like,
yeah, they're
they're all contractors here, and they use fake names, so fuck off. And they're like, well,
yeah, and they work for cash. Okay, this is where I do want to talk. There's a book that I read by Scottish comedian Fern Brady called Strong Female Character. It's about her, like, having an adult diagnosis of autism and how that's affected her life. And it's a really good book. It came out, I think, in 2021 or 2022, I believe. But it's a really good book. But she talks about how while she was, like, in college, she was a stripper for a while, and how it was, like, a really interesting experience, and especially how, like, having undiagnosed autism plays into that. I was just thinking about how she talks about what it's actually like to be a stripper versus how it is portrayed in this show and in like most television shows or pieces of media that are like, oh, it's like this nasty, dirty place. And in her book, she's like, yeah, it is a little bit like that, but it's also a much more like, like people know like the people who are working there know each other. Like even if it's not necessarily like always a supportive like girls place.
It's like it is just
the
a
girls
workplace.
do know each other.
You do know
and
your
the
coworkers.
Men,
like
yeah, and like. But I would really recommend that book. It's Strong Female Character by Fern Brady. It's very good. The audiobook is narrated by her, so I would recommend checking it out.
Yeah. We don't get to see Dean in the strip club with the strippers because we cut to this guy named Lenny in the strip club with this stripper named Belle. Pause for laughs. And like he loves her, and they leave the strip club together. And he comes out of the room of like he's taking care of his mom. He's taking care of his mother. He is her full-time caretaker. And Belle's like, "Oh my God, like that you're so kind, you're so wonderful, you take care of her, it's so wonderful of you, blah blah blah." They have sex, whatever, and then afterwards she's like, "I love you so much. We could be together forever if your mom wasn't here. You should kill her." And it's like the transition is quite funny. And he just he looks kind of glazed over or whatever, and he's like, "Okay, I will." Like at first he like pauses and he's like, "What?" And then she's like, "Please, pretty please, will you do it for me?" And he's like, "Okay." And then he just goes and kills his mother. And the next day, Dean is alone in the motel room, and he has Sam's phone, don't know why, and he dials the last number that Sam called because he's snooping on Sam, and Ruby answers, and he immediately hangs up, and he's like, "God damn it." And then Sam returns, and he's like, "Hey, so there's been another murder by Lenny, and this time he killed his mom." And Dean's like, "Wait, what do you mean?" He's like, "Well, it was a woman who was closest to him." The gender thing is very key here. Very key here. Just very key. It keeps being said. We're about women.
Yeah. And also, like, there's a romance aspect that we all must consider. It's just important.
Much to unpack. And then, so, Bobby calls. Clearly, they've been in contact with Bobby. And you're like, yeah, Bobby's in this episode. Bobby was doing some research, and he was like, okay, I think that we're dealing with a siren. And the funny part is, when he says this, and Sam relays this information, and Dean's like, from, like, the Odyssey? Like, Greek mythology? And Sam's like, how do you know that? And he's like, I read. We have to remember, we've said this many times on this podcast, Dean will make fun of another bitch for reading any book. And then he's out here quoting the Odyssey.
Dean called Sam gay for reading the Brothers Grimm. Dean was like, wait, maybe gay is okay. I'm going to start reading. And now Dean is gay. Wait, guys, I have a board of red thread. And I'm going to be like, this is how reading in Supernatural Universe makes you gay.
Maybe the Republicans were right, and reading does make you gay.
Reading makes you gay. That's what the fuck I'm saying. Guys, stay tuned for my video essay about why in the Supernatural Universe, if you can read, you're gay. If you want a bonus episode, let me know. Sound off in the comments and click that subscribe button.
Yeah. And also, when they're talking about the mythology of it all, they're like, yeah, like sirens, they like, they were on islands and they disguise themselves as the perfect lure to the perfect mate to lure men. To lure men. They say that word. Much to unpack. And so when Bobby calls up and he's like, okay, so it's actually, the way that it works is a kind of venom, and the only way to kill them is like with a bronze dagger like dipped in the blood of one of its victims so that she's poisoned with her own venom. But the problem is they have to find somebody who's currently under her spell before she has them kill somebody to do it. So then the boys go back to Dr. Kara Roberts. And they're like, okay, let's get a blood sample taken from one of the men, and we'll use that. So they're going to try and steal it. And they show up. They're like, hey, we're the FBI. We're back. And then another man shows up. his name is Nick Monroe, and he also introduces himself as an FBI agent. And he's like, clearly like, who are you people? And they're like,
and it's like, Sam and Dean are like, oh fuck, like an actual FBI agent is here, it's
fuck.
fucking over.
Yeah.
This has happened to them a couple times before. I will say, I think that the other times that this has happened where like the cops or the FBI have shown up have made them be like, okay, we need a contingency plan.
Yeah. And so they're like, you know what?
Because they handle this way better.
Yeah, they have a protocol, they have whatever. And they're like, you know what? Call up our supervisor, Mike Kaiser. Here's his number. And you can, you know, we're from DC, whatever. And the guy's like, okay. He walks over. He calls up the number. you know who picks up? Bobby. Bobby.
This is one of my favorite scenes. And there are so many amazing scenes in this episode, but this is maybe one of my favorite scenes in the whole show.
This is a great one.
It's so fucking good.
Bobby is standing at the stove frying something, and he's
wearing a kiss, an apron that literally says "kiss the cook." I mean, like, this is the best day of my life.
Bobby is so iconic, and he picks up a phone that is specifically labeled as FBI, and he's like,
yeah, we see, like, when he goes to hang up the phone, you see he has like this huge, like, array of like 10 landlines all next to each other that are labeled, like, one says like FBI, one says like local police, one says like all these different identifications. Like, he has this shit on lock. Bobby is locked in.
Bobby is so locked the fuck in. And Monroe asks him all these questions, whatever, and he's like, oh, and so you're gonna question me? You know that we have jurisdiction over you in DC. Like, don't bother me again. And he's, like, fucking pissed on the phone. He's like, God, like, don't bother me. And then he, like, pissily hangs up or whatever. And the guy's like, all right, like, seems like it checks out, whatever. And Bobby's like, ugh, God, I'm trying to have my little day off. Frying up something. And so the guy goes back to them and he's like, you know, I guess I'm off the case, whatever. And so they're trying to get information from him. And they're like, yo, so like, what have you found out? And he's like, so far. And he's like, guys, I think there's a link between them. And they're like, oh, what is it? And he's like, all the men went to the same strip club. And they're like, oh, really? And he's like, I think we should go, whatever. And they're like, shit, like we gotta get this guy to stop, whatever. And Dean goes to be like, oh, like, we're like lone wolves, like, you know, you can't come with us, like, just go home, whatever. And Sam's like, no, he's clearly gonna investigate more, you need to keep him busy. And Dean's like, girl, do I have to? And Sam's like, yes, I have to get the blood sample, like, whatever. So Sam goes to get the blood sample. This guy,
Sam was like, I don't trust your goofy ass to get this blood sample.
Yeah. And
this is another situation of Sam being an ally.
No, literally, accidentally. And Dean's like, oh my God. And so this guy goes with Dean to the Impala to go to a strip club. Okay, and as they leave, this is where it starts. This is where it starts. Nick, his name is. He's admiring the Impala. And he's like, oh, like, isn't this cool? Like, he's naming the, you know, all the specs.
He walks out, he's like, he walks out, he's like, oh, is you drive an Impala? That's awesome. It's a 67, right? That's got a 4-cylinder, and starts, like, listing all these car facts. And he's like, how'd the Bureau let you drive your own car?
And then they get in the car and they're talking about drinks, they're talking about classic rock, they're talking about whatever. And then they drive to the strip club. And they're like, that's so crazy. They go to the strip club, they sit down at a table, the two of them hanging at the strip club, and they're bonding.
They're bonding while there are, like, girls stripping in the background. There's a girl pole dancing in the background. Dean, his ass is not looking.
He is not looking.
He is locked in. He is not. That is the biggest thing in this this situation, is that there are actively beautiful women getting undressed and doing provocative dances, and Dean, whose whole thing was, thank God, finally a case with strippers, is talking to this guy.
Yeah.
And they've also been drinking and are clearly like, whatever, I don't care about the women. Like, his inhibitions are down.
Yeah.
And he is, like, locked in with
to the
this
point
guy.
Where he forgets to say that he's also a Fed. And the guy's like, well, because you're a Fed too, whatever. And he's like, ah! And you're like, whoa.
Yeah, he's talking. He's like, man, I can't believe you're so cool for a Fed. And he's like, aren't we both Feds? And he's like, well, yeah, but not a lot of people are like us.
And you're like,
and I was like,
like us?
No,
Hello?
you don't get cool Feds. You don't get cool Feds like us. And I'm like, Dean, it's
you're
crazy.
not beating
It's
the
one of those things
allegations.
I'm like, okay, I know it's queer baiting, but it was kind of too early even for queer baiting to be mainstream.
Yeah.
So, like, it wasn't queer baiting. They just wrote this extremely gay episode.
No, and so, but, like, here's the thing. It does get worse. Like, I can't stress to you enough. This is just the beginning. So, and this is the scene where I'm like, this is imprinted in my brain, whatever. Is Dean in the strip club talking to a man. Every single other man in the strip club is talking to a woman, except for Dean, who's talking to a man. And not just talking to a man, having a fun time with a man. And not in like, oh, we're dudes, bros, we're going to the strip club together kind of way. No, in a like, oh my God, we're bonding. Wait, what the fuck?
Talking to a man who's also a fucking Fed.
Yeah.
Because Dean does not like the police or the government.
Dean does not like the feds.
And the crazy, it's so funny because he's like, Dean's listing off these songs that he likes, and Nick is like telling him who like the songwriter was. And there's one song that Dean's like, oh yeah, like this is the songwriter of this song. And he's like, well, you know, it's actually like this and one other guy. And Dean's like, oh my God, like you're so fucking cool.
No, Dean is literally like kicking his feet, giggling, twirling his hair. It's so fucking dark.
Like, he's writing Dean Monroe in all of his notebooks.
It's so, and then Nick is like, okay, so like, I may have found something, that connects all of them, and that was at one of the latest murders. And he pulls it out of his pocket, and it's a flower. It's a hyacinth flower at the scene of each crime. And Dean's like, oh my God, that flower was in Dr. Roberts' office, the woman who wants to fuck Sam. And he's like, shit. And then we cut to Sam and Kara are hanging, tie loose. Clearly, they start drinking together, whatever. They are flirting up a storm. They're talking about the case. They're whatever.
Yeah. There was one specific thing during this conversation where Sam is like talking about like, oh, like it's so crazy because like why would these men like do this? It's just weird. They all loved their wives. Like we have a specialist who wants to run the blood and we're gonna do all this.
Yeah.
But I just don't get it at the end of the day. Because he's trying to sort of instill in her, like, something's fishy here, so don't feel bad that don't feel like you didn't do your job because the FBI are investigating, basically. And she's like, well, you know, like, I kind of get it. Like, sometimes your feelings just change. Sometimes things happen.
Yeah. Well, she says that because she starts talking about her own past, where she's like, yeah, I had a husband, and then like feelings changed and whatever, and she's like kind of bitter about it, whatever. And the key thing here is that when they went to go look for the blood samples were gone. They were stolen. And so now they've been hanging out in the office because they're looking at the security footage. And so she gets like into all this stuff, and like Sam starts to open up to her, and he's like, I think I have a theory. I think that the men were drugged. And she's like, I don't know, like what drug would it be? But like they have a report. They're like talking about it, whatever. And they're talking about relationships, whatever. And she comes on to Sam hard. Like, you're like, damn. All right, girl, get it. Good for her. And he's like, all right. And they start making out hardcore. Dean calls. He ignores it.
Also, the crazy thing, are they not in her office looking for the blood samples?
Yes.
Why the fuck are you keeping blood samples in your office? Like, that should be in a lab. Or
God
like,
knows.
Secure storage.
God
Like, there's
knows.
no reason that you should have blood samples, especially ones from active, like, ongoing criminal investigations. Like, you should not have that shit in your fucking office.
Nothing in this show makes any sense. But yeah, so they start fucking hardcore, and they don't close those blinds. The whole time I'm like, weren't there people outside that office? Like, I mean, good for Sam. They do make a joke about this later that I think is very funny. Later, Sam calls Dean. Sam is walking into their motel room. He calls Dean. Dean is in the car. And Dean is like, okay, so I was hanging with my bestie Monroe, and I think I figured it out. I have a theory about the hyacinths. And I think it's her. I think it's Kara. Her ex-husband mysteriously died of a heart attack. She just moved here a couple months ago, blah, blah, blah. And I think she's the siren. And Sam's like, I don't believe that. And Dean's like, oh my God, did you sleep with her? And then he makes a joke over and he's like, what is it with you and fucking monsters? Which is true. This happens to Sam a lot.
This is crazy because he starts listing them off and he's like, oh, Ruby, Madison. Do y'all remember Madison?
The werewolf?
She was a werewolf from like one episode 2 seasons ago. That's crazy. That's a crazy cut.
Listen.
The fact that the writers can remember Madison exists but can't remember
the third Winchester brother?
Can't remember. They can't remember the third Winchester brother. They can't remember like the entire point of the show by the last season. It's just like whatever.
Damn, we went for the jugular. No, but he takes him to task for it, and he's like, and Sam's like, girl, I still don't know if that's it, like whatever. And he's like, he's like, I can't trust you. And Sam's like, just come here, like we'll work it out, whatever. And he's like, actually, no, I'm not. Like I definitely have to do this on my own. And Sam like throws the phone. He's really frustrated. And I believe during this part about the hyacinth also, that he's like, oh, like that's associated with the siren because it's like from the Greek island or whatever. And I'm like, pause. Now we're mixing mythologies. Also, Dean Winchester, the myth of Hyacinthus. Dean Winchester, I know what you are. Quickly, tell me the myth of Hyacinthus. Dean. That's so crazy.
Me sitting here who was not a Greek mythology gay growing up. Wow, I sure know what that is.
Okay. The myth of did they reference it in the myth of Hyacinthus has to do with it was a man who the god Apollo admired who gets turned into a flower.
Oh,
so it's homo.
That should okay, that makes sense. It's Apollo, of course it is.
It's basically he was a Spartan prince. He was a lover of Apollo, and he was also admired by by another god. And Hyacinthus chose Apollo, and then they were gay lovers, and then basically Zephyrus like kills him, and then like Apollo turns him into the flower.
Wow. Holy shit.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty
goddamn.
It's pretty wild and crazy. Actually, no, okay, there's parts of this that I'm missing. The part that I thought of when I was watching this is that like, oh god, it's the gay thing. But basically
that's the TLDR. I mean, people can look it up if they really need a deep dive, but I feel like you've given an adequate enough.
Basically, yeah, he dies in his arms. And it's like a what? Oh, Dean Winchester is associated with a tragic gay love story? That's crazy.
That could never happen to Dean Winchester.
That's so wild. Yeah, Apollo was so mad that he was killed and then died in his arms that he wanted to become immortal so he could die with him. That's so
what
crazy.
The fuck? Wait. Hold the fuck up. That's so...
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Isn't that much to unpack? And they misuse this. They say some random shit in this episode where they're like, well, it's from the island that this thing was... I'm like, no, that's not correct
true.
Or whatever. But like, all right, sure. But the whole time I'm just like, Hyacinth? Hyacinthus? Anyway, Yoatzi Cast. I just... Every day.
Listen, we will find a way to make everything about Destiel. You can fucking trust that.
And the thing is that it doesn't require that much effort. It doesn't. Okay, this one might be as much about... But here we get to actual gay content, though. Because first, Dean calls Bobby. Bobby doesn't answer. And you think the scene is going to be over. Because Dean just said to Sam, I have to do this on my own. He calls Bobby. Bobby doesn't answer. And then do you know who he calls? He calls Monroe, the guy who he's been lying to when trying to get off their tail because he's another FBI agent. He calls the man who he just spent a night with, which we've talked about the parallels between whenever they put Sam with a girl and then Dean with a man. Because suddenly all of the sexual energy that they tried to put on Dean for 3 seasons didn't stick. So they start having Sam fuck women instead. And then they just put Dean into situations with men. So it just keeps happening. So there's always parallels between Sam is with a woman and then Dean is with a man. But because Dean is with a man, it's not sexual in any sort of way. But like it's always happening. So Sam is out fucking a bitch and Dean is having a night out with a man. Let's think. Anyway, so Dean and Nick now are on a stakeout together.
I have 2 things written down in my notes. I want you to say what happens, and then I have to read out what I wrote down.
So they watch Kara, the doctor, arrive at a club, just like a random nightclub, and they're gonna watch, and they're like, all right, let's see who she comes out with, whatever, I think that it's her, blah, blah, blah. And Dean describes, and it says this in the fucking wiki, as Sam did with Kara. So Sam told Kara of a modified version of the poisoning and drugging theory right before they fucked. And now Dean is alone with a man, does the same thing. Okay? I'm just saying. He's like, I think that she's poisoning them, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, I don't know if it's something that has to do with like bodily contact or I think, does Nick say it about the saliva or does Dean say it?
Nick says it, but that doesn't happen yet. Because the thing that happens is Dean is saying this.
Oh,
like he's like,
yeah.
I think it might be some sort of contact thing. Then the crazy thing happens where Dean pulls out his hip flask, takes a sip, hands it to Nick without wiping it off. Nick laughs, takes a sip, hands it back to Dean, who takes another sip, and I wrote down, drinking from the same flask, an indirect kiss.
No, literally, because I had the same thought. I was like, in an anime, this would be gay.
Yeah, and then he's like, I think it might be the saliva. That's what Nick says.
And then Nick is like, well, or it could be saliva. And then he just turns to him, and Dean's like, oh, fuck, and realizes that he just...
No, Dean doesn't even react. Dean's like, huh? What? But he's not mad.
No, it's not that he's mad. He realizes, like, he doesn't have like an oh fuck reaction, but he's like, he's like, oh, and Nick is just like kind of like smiles, whatever, and is like, yeah, I guess it might be the saliva, and looks at him and whatever, and you're like, oh shit, Nick is the siren, and
which is fucking crazy. Let's get to their explanation, to like the conclusion of this scene, and we'll hear their explanation first, and I think we need to save our commentary until we get to the end, because it will be unlistenable. No, let's try to save our commentary unless there's anything super specific.
Yeah. So Nick starts saying to Dean, he's like, well, you can't trust Sam. You have to get him out of the way so that I can be the perfect brother that you want. And you're like, brother?
Once again, brothers in the same way that Dean and Cass are brothers, like, you know?
Brother, like,
a lot like the way that those two old men in the last episode we talked about last week were like brothers.
Like, brother? And here's the thing, like, traditionally with like a siren or a succubus mythology, like nowadays it's really interpreted as always being like overly sexual when it could just be like anything that someone truly desires. But in this episode and in this mythology, they make it very explicitly sexual. Very explicitly sexual. Except for at the turn here where there's like, oh, well, we're just besties, we're just bros. And you're like, and I'm trying to replace your brother. What?
Trust, I have much to say. If I start now, I won't be able to stop.
So, Sam is returned to the hotel room. Lo and behold, who is there? Nick, sitting on one of the beds. And Sam's like, what the fuck? And I believe he says something about, like, being a perfect brother or something. And then Dean shows up, grabs him, and holds a knife to his throat and starts cutting Sam's neck at Nick's command. And you're like, whoa, what the fuck? Remember, in the earlier parts of this episode, we saw a woman who just slept with a man be like, go kill your mother. And then he did it. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. And then basically they're like, why are you doing this, whatever. And Nick describes how he's like, yeah, so I kind of just get a high. I get bored, and so I kind of get a high from watching people like fall in love with me and kill for me. I think it's fun. I think it's slayful. And you're like, oh, like not only is he a siren, but he's also kind of fucked up.
He's like, I like it when people fall in love with me, and I want someone to fall in love with me again and again and again and again.
And you're like, oh, damn. The other key piece of this is that, like, with the sirens, like, if you look at them in the mirror, you can see their, like, true, like, fucked up form. And then you see his face kind of change, and he spits venom at Sam and infects him. And I'm like, okay, so I guess all he had to do was do that. And so then he starts saying shit, and he's like, I know that you guys have issues with each other, and I think you should fight it out. And
he's also, the other important thing to note about this point is that he's also saying stuff that he's like, I can be the perfect brother, Sam. Like, the crazy thing was that all Dean wanted was someone who would listen to him because he feels like you're hiding things from him, and he feels like you're not who you were. Like, he basically is talking about all the ways that he'd be a better brother than Sam. And I'm like, okay, I get why the Wincest shippers like this episode. Like, I get it. Like, I hate to say the Wincesties kind of won with this episode, low-key.
Like, it's not a win for the rest of us, but they won.
No. Well, it's a win for the rest of us in other ways.
Yeah.
But no, I get it. I ship Wincest now. Don't take that clip out of context,
Guys, take that clip out of context, please. No, because...
Oh, and I'll just say, because it wasn't as funny when I said it, that was the joke that I was talking about at the beginning of the episode. I'm realizing now, I know I said I wasn't gonna shout it out, but... I realized it wasn't as funny as I thought it was. Flop on my part. I could just fix it in post, but no. I'm not too proud to admit when I've made a mistake.
Unlike some showrunners of Supernatural.
I'm like I'm a showrunner of Supernatural. Let me in the room. I've got an idea and a dream. I'm making Wincest canon. That's a joke. I mean, that one is a joke.
They kind of did that in the last episode.
Claudia, what the fuck are you talking about? Shut the hell up. The last episode was bad, but they did not make Wincest canon.
There was a lot going on there. We can't talk about that today.
Talk about the boys fighting. These greasy men fighting.
Yeah, so they start to fight it out. And he also said, Nick says the siren is like, the survivor gets to be with me forever. And you're like, oh... Key thing here is that when the siren would talk to a man that she was fucking earlier, she'd be like, and you get to be with me forever. What's going on? Anyway, so Dean, they're both under the spell of the siren at this point, and they're fighting, and Dean's like, I feel like you've changed. I know that you lie to me. You hide things from me. And Sam, like, lashes out at him, and he's like, you know, I want to hunt Lilith, and you're not strong enough. Like, I'm stronger than you, blah, blah.
Yeah, he's like, that's why, because Dean is like, well, you've been, like, talking to Ruby and lying about it. And he's like, well, yeah, I go with Ruby because you're not strong enough, basically. And he's like, but we're going to kill Lilith, whatever. Do you think that the siren was like, I'm gonna make them fight, and then they started talking about, like, demons and Lilith, and he's like, oh, well, you lied to me about hell. Do you think he's sitting there like, what the fuck? Well, like, I had no idea what was going on with them.
He could read their mind, so I just know at some point he was like, whoa, that's crazy.
Like, because he's not, like, a demon or anything. He doesn't have a network like that. He's just, like, at the end of the day, he's just some monster. He's like, he's hearing about this. He's like, what the fuck? I picked the wrong guy.
No, literally.
What's going on?
Damn, that's crazy. And, like, Sam gets really asshole-ish about being like, you know, you don't tell me about your shit when you went to hell. They are, like, beating the shit out of each other. They're smashing through the room door. Dean gets he's like about to fucking kill Sam with a fire axe. and King of the Day Bobby shows up and stabs Dean with a dagger. And then he whirls around, uses the dagger with Dean's infected blood to then stab the siren.
Stab Dean in the shoulder, not in the gut. He was not gonna kill him.
I love how
in the wiki they say,
we see its true hideous form revealed. The spell is broken.
"Hi, this is Ollie in post. Sorry that last line sounded so janky. There was an issue with the original reading, so I recreated it as well as I could. Anyway, back to the show."
We cut to the next day. Bobby hands the boy, they're out by their cars, they're having a beer, but Bobby hands them 2 bottles and they're like, "What the hell?" And he's like, "It's soda, because aren't you guys going to be driving?" Which is very funny reference to the fact that they have this scene where they're drinking by the Impala all the time, and you're like, yeah, aren't they going to drive? Bobby's like, "Have a sody pop."
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, "Hey, you guys know that anybody can get bested by a siren. It doesn't matter how strong you are. That's kind of the point. And don't feel weird about it. And what you guys said to each other, it's not real. You guys need to be okay with that." And they're like, no, we're fine. It didn't have a lasting effect. Tee-hee, bye. And Bobby's like, "All right, see you guys later." And then they just kind of look at each other and they're like
There's another thing that Bobby says before he leaves, where he's they're like, "Wow, how'd you know, to come here?" And he's like, "Well, it's actually funny. I found out that Nick Monroe wasn't a real agent because I called the FBI and asked about the agent."
Oh, yeah.
So, you guys probably should have just looked that shit up anyway.
Not him being "I immediately knew that Dean is having a gay moment, so I needed to..." He's like, "Super Nanny, you're in a crisis. I'm on my way."
He was like, "I have to prepare who I'm going to give shovel talk to." So true.
And then the boys are like, "I didn't mean any of the stuff I said." And they're awkwardly, clearly being I said some kind of bitchy things. Oops. And clearly they have some unresolved issues. And then the episode
Shocking.
just ends.
There's also another thing here, they are like, "Oh, well, I didn't mean what I said, blah, 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 whatever." And they're gonna skip town. And
oh, yeah.
Dean is like, "Don't you want to say bye to Kara, to the doctor?" And Sam's like, "No, I don't feel like I need to." And I'm like, okay, Sam's slutting it up. But
he's also in his nihilism era. He high-key thinks he's gonna die.
Yeah. Also, I know that Sam and Ruby are not boyfriend and girlfriend or anything, but it still felt like cheating.
Yeah, I was like, "Damn, you fucking slut."
No, literally, I'm no slut shaming. I'm Sam shaming.
No, because
I'm
because Dean, as soon as he meets Cass, he's fucking nobody. For
that's not
seasons.
True, but he's fucking way less.
No, he's when he is fucking somebody, it's because he got in a relationship with them, which is Lisa. But he's not out and about
Lisa.
fucking.
Also, okay, I think now is the time where we can say what we're all thinking.
Yeah.
It's crazy how a siren for the entire show, entire episode, is showing up as beautiful women to lure these men in. Yet, when the decision comes to lure Dean in, or Sam, I guess whoever he'd been paired up with, decided that the best option was to go for a man. Decided instead of appearing to Dean as a female FBI agent who could kind of... And I think the whole thing is that it's more than love. Dean wants his brother back. Dean wants the old Sam who would listen to him and would trust him and would follow him.
Yeah.
And all that stuff. And I think that's kind of the implication, which is again why I was the Wincesties kind of won. But that being said, Dean is also a deeply horny man.
Yeah.
So, and is always talking about women. And I know it's performative a lot of the time, but why would you pick a man?
Well, and
why would you do that? Why would you?
It's a clear example of this show being we're going so far towards whatever narrative point that we're gonna do that we went backwards around to be gay by accident. And all the time. Like,
and it's also just like, especially after the reveal that he's a siren, is like the every time I was so uncomfortable every time he was like, we'll be brothers, like we'll be brothers, because in the canon that you've established, as Claudia said earlier, like you have established in this episode that sirens are like a person who is like every other case we've seen is someone who is being lured in via sexual and romantic love.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it's like, well, when it comes to Dean Winchester,
it's a man.
It's platonic? Like, fuck off. No, it's not.
Yeah.
He just thought Dean was gay and was like, yeah, I'm gonna go for it. And then was like, oh, well, he is gay. He just doesn't know it yet.
He's
so
gay.
I'll lure him. I'll ease him in with the brother idea, and then we'll go from there.
He's like, he's gay, but more importantly, he's got a lot of brother issues. So we'll just go with that. No, but like, and the other piece of it also is that like, they could have done the same plot line with like a woman FBI agent, and she's like the perfect like hot chick who like knows things about cars, and like, and so like she could have done like all the same stuff with him, and he's be like, oh, like there's somebody who like gets me, and also she's like a hot babe. But they didn't do that. They didn't do that. Like,
I think that like because like I said, from like the actual perspective of like what were the writers thinking, my thought is that it is also, episode was written by a woman. I do think that it was like, again, like I said, it was like, oh, it's to show that Dean talks so much about women, but a lot of that's just performative because what he really cares about is his brother. And I think that that's like a good, I think that's like the main adaptation that I'm like, or the main point that I'm taking away from this episode is that this is proof that Dean doesn't actually care all that much about that. He just wants his family.
Yeah.
But I also think it's crazy that with that was like, that in order to portray that, they made a male siren go after him. I'm like, that's a fucking crazy thing to do, especially when every other siren has been engaging in sexual love. Like, what are we talking about?
And like,
what are we talking about?
Like,
what are we doing?
Dean is literally the like, I fuck bitches and get money character. You're like, what the fuck? No, and paired with the episode we just watched, where he was like, I'm putting on a facade and I'm making out with girls and I'm whatever, and then a girl calls him on his shit. And then in this episode, it's like, the thing that you want most is a man? A man? Like, I just, when we said we would be unintelligible about this, no, because that's why.
I'm really shocked. I'm actually really impressed at how intelligible I feel like we are. I feel like this has been very, very, well spoken. Good job, us.
We did it, Joe.
This show, you see why it's like,
it haunts you.
It's so weird because it's like, okay, Dean Winchester has got to be one of the craziest characters ever written. Because I feel bad because I feel like we don't talk about Sam as much, but I think it's because Sam is like, first of all, I think Sam is much more consistently written.
Yeah, he's
like, I feel like
he's very interesting and consistently written, I would say. Like,
yeah, and I feel like it's so funny because I'm like, I feel like Sam is always the one who's furthering the plot. Like, what Sam has going on is always the thing pushing the plot forward, and Dean is there, and then the stuff Dean gets wrapped up in is stuff that is related to Sam's plots.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of like the nature of the show, is like these two brothers are super intertwined, and what happens when you're that codependent. And I think that is like, it's an interesting perspective, and it is a very like kind of like the point of the show. But I do think it's funny how I'm like, Sam is doing all this stuff and is dealing with all this stuff. And I feel like it's just that Dean is spending so much time reacting to stuff that it's like, you get to see, I feel like Sam as a person is almost a little bit more scripted than Dean, in the way that he's like, okay, I'm like,
Dean feels like an NPC sometimes.
And the way he kind of does.
Yeah, but and like, I will say in later seasons, worse seasons, Dean becomes more of the main character than Sam, because they've already wrung out everything they can from Sam. Like the Mark of Cain.
Oh God, don't. I feel like Dean is kind of fun as like, almost like, okay. If this was like a bigger ensemble show, Dean would be almost like the comic relief character who then has one really serious episode and is like a complete fan favorite.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like that, and I feel like that's why people are so attached to him, and I feel like that's like one of the reasons why like the queer discourse is the wrong word, but the queer coding and the queer like the queerification of him by the fandom, I think that's like one of the reasons is because so often you find those quirky characters who are hiding something, or those quirky characters who have like a much deeper inner world.
Yeah.
Like you find a lot of the time that a lot of queer people can relate to that.
Yeah.
And I think especially because it's not an ensemble cast, like with Dean being a main character and having so much more to work with, so many people see so many aspects of themselves in him, and it's just really interesting. And it's interesting watching it from like with that perspective in mind.
Dean Winchester, there's so much to love and so much to hate about you. And it's funny that I used to be a Sam girl, and now I'm like, well, Dean's just my little best friend. That's my little guy. Sometimes I want to kill him, but mostly I want to kill the people who wrote him. But like, that's just my little man right there. Like, I can't wait until we get to the later seasons that are fucking weird, because your reactions are going to be so funny. But like in these seasons right now, it's very like, there are moments that stay with you. And this episode is one of them. You don't really remember what happened in the episode, but the episode where Dean's siren was a fucking man, top 10 moments. Top 10 moments.
I also think it's just crazy how the fact that this character, like a monster, like from mythology, who is like, their whole thing is like appealing to like love and like to sexual feelings, all that stuff, appears as a man to Dean. Like a character like that appears like that in this show and appears as a man to Lauren Dean more than once.
Yeah.
Is very interesting. Very interesting. Interesting indeed.
It's just...
Anyway.
It's very interesting to me. And like the common interpretation again is like a succubus of siren or whatever. It doesn't have to be a woman. It doesn't have to be sexual. It doesn't have to be whatever. But in this show it is. So what's the tea? What's the truth? What's going on? Anyway, we've learned a lot about hyacinthus and sirens today. Also, that Dean Winchester reads the Odyssey.
And on that, thank you for listening. For more supernatural stuff, you can follow us on social media. We're at Mystery Spotcast on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Tumblr. You can also ask us questions in our Tumblr Ask Box or at any of those places. You can also email us. We're themysteryspotcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed, please rate the show. Leave us a review. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podchaser, all that stuff. Leave a comment on our YouTube channel, which we now have. And tell a friend. We appreciate it. And also, as a reminder, we do have a little fic recommendation form in our show notes. It's just for us. So if you could send that over, that would be lovely. We are also two of the co-hosts of RuPaul's Pod Race, a queer Star Wars podcast. We are currently covering the Star Wars show, The Acolyte. It's super fun. Go check it out. And with that, we'll see you 2 Tuesdays from now for more slaying people, queer baiting things, the supernatural business.